G'day, I'm Graham from No Idea. Welcome to my shed. As you probably know already, No Idea Racing is a super low-cost kart racing team based in and around Woodnilling and Katanning in the Great Southern. We race at Albany as well as other tracks around Western Australia. Given that there's no karting going on now and we all have a lot of time on our hands, I thought we'd get stuck into some projects. I'm going to take you through some projects on my karts, as well as some other projects on things like the transporter, the ute for hauling the transporter, and a few other things. I'm very new to doing this, and we're actually recording this at the moment on an Aztec, which is like a cheap wannabe GoPro cam. So please cut me some slack in terms of video quality. My editing is done on a program that I just bought last night for $13. So please, once again, we haven't been doing this for long, cut me a break there. What we're going to get started on today is a new project, and by new I mean really old, but it's something I've had sitting around for a long time. So I'll take you over to it now. So this is a shifter kart chassis, or bits of a shifter kart chassis at the moment. I bought this chassis for, I believe it was about $300, just after I'd started, I think, on my first Luxor kart, which is now got my KT 100 on it. So I saw this for sale on Marketplace or something like that, and it was super cheap, and I thought, oh look, I'll buy it, thinking it was just a normal tag chassis because it'll give me some spare stub axles and some spare parts, which can be a little tricky to get for these Luxor karts. When I got it, I was super pumped to find there was a box with it, full of the front brake setup and all the other associated shifter parts. So at that time, I stripped it down, powder coated the frame, and basically put it all together. Gave it a quick clean up. It's been sitting in the shed uncovered now for, I don't know, probably a couple of years, so it's covered in gunk. And you'll notice various parts have been pinched off as I've needed spares for my other karts. So overall, it's a Lenzo Kart Luxor. I think you might be able to see the tag there. Chassis, 2010, post 2010, maybe around 2014 or something like that. It was in really rough condition when I got it. Gave it a quick powder coat, cleaned it up, put it back together. Anybody who's getting into karts for the first time, strongly recommend if you buy a second-hand kart, particularly if it's not super new, go to the trouble of pulling it down, powder coat the frame, put it all back together. Number one, the powder coated frame helps you see when things are going wrong, so you can see what's rubbing on the bottom of the kart. I reckon it helps you see when cracks and stuff like that come too, because you see something different to a uniform surface. And number two, when you pull a kart down to put it back together, you find what's missing, you find broken bearings, you find things that need work. It's just a really good thing to do with any kart, I find. So this kart is going to be our new project. I've got an engine that we'll pull out to have a look at in a moment, but the first thing I'm going to do before we talk about the engine or pull out the engine is give it a clean up, and then we'll look at what parts I need to replace to get this back to a rolling chassis. Okay, when it comes to cleaning the kart, I just use a spray and wipe, citrus spray and wipe that you find at the supermarkets. Huge fan of cleaning karts. I find between races, if you've got nothing to change, grab a rag, grab some spray and wipe of some and give the kart a wipe over. The amount of times that I've found something that's either a bolt that's about to come out or a bolt that has come out, a cable that's coming loose, etc. In between races, it really saves you. So it's a good idea. Get used to cleaning your karts, and if you look after your kart, it'll look after you. Okay, so now I've cleaned up the kart, we'll go to replacing some missing parts. First one that is obviously missing is a steering column. Steering columns like this get bent all the time when we're racing karts. I think they're designed to bend. Both those and the steering rods just here seem to be the weak link, with the idea being, I guess, that you don't bend or damage the stub axle. So you'll bend a lot of these, you'll bend a lot of these, and hopefully these will stay fairly straight. When it comes to putting one of these in, pretty simple. However, a bit of maintenance never goes astray. On all of your frames, you'll have a little bearing down here. Alright, when you get your frame powder coated, they'll pop that out. It's a great idea to put a new one in, get rid of any steering slop or steering movement that you might have. They look like that. I've just put this one in, it's just retained in by a circlip. And then we can go ahead and slide the steering column in. So something I'm going to have to get used to is working with one hand. Bang that. That goes through there. Alright, beauty. And the nut goes on from underneath to retain your steering shaft in place. Next thing I'm going to do is the exact same thing. This is one of the parts that makes a shifter cart a shifter cart. So this is our gear change lever. You'll notice down the bottom there, that's rattling around all over the place, because once again, when this chassis was powder coated, the bearings were all driven out. So this bearing is going to go in there, and we'll have that ready to go in 2 seconds.
Alright, as per normal, the simple job of putting the bearing in for the shifter turned into a not simple job. Keen eye will see I grab a hammer here somewhere. Basically a bit of powder coat got into the housing where the bushing goes or the bearing goes, so that needs to be cleaned out first before we could get that bearing in and hold it in place with the clip. All done though, then we move on to installing the rest of the steering components. That went fairly smoothly, so for the rest of this little time lapse you're going to get to hear some of the free sample music that comes with a $13 editing program. Turns out you don't get many free features with a $13 editing program, but we can thank a bloke by the name of Dr. Turtle for that free music clip.
Okay, so it's starting to look a bit more like a go-kart again. We've got our steering on, our shafts in, we've hooked up our steering arms to our stub axles. We've also got our gear shifter in on its new bearing. So this is all nice and smooth. You can see another part of being a shifter is it's got a clutch handle on this side over here. So one thing that I didn't anticipate, and this is, if you're getting into karts, this is something you're going to come across a lot. So this steering shaft was a non-genuine steering shaft. There's a lot of different sizes of these. Essentially you've got a measurement from here to here to make sure you line up pretty well with where your stub axles are for the geometry. There's also a measurement in between these two faces. You can see in mine, I've only put in one of the spaces. When I went to put it together, you can see the other spacer is the same size as this. There's no way it was going to fit. So little things like that when you're buying non-genuine parts, which believe me you will because they cost about half as much, be prepared to make some changes on the fly. So I need to go and machine myself up some new spacers, or you could use washers or whatever works for you. But we're together and I'm happy with that for the moment. Last couple of things we're going to chuck on. I've got a floor tray that now we've got the steering bolted up. We can pop a floor tray on. I'll pop the wheels and tyres on just to get them out of the way and have this thing looking a little bit like a go-kart. And then we'll get on to the engine for this project.
So for this time lapse I'll spare you from the free music that came on my program. As we chuck the wheels on here, you'll probably see sitting at the back of the shed against the wall is the floor tray. So that floor tray was the one that was supposed to be put on a few moments ago. Didn't fit, as happens between models. We'll have to look at making a new one of those because it's probably easier to make one than find one in good condition for a Luxor of this year. So we'll see how we go with that.
Okay, now that the cart looks a little bit more like a cart, let's get on to the fun part of this project, and that is putting an engine on it so we can make lots of broom noises and do donuts. Here's an engine I found. Okay, so this is a water-cooled 125cc Rotax. From what I can find, it's a model 124. What's interesting is if I have a look down here in the head casting, you can probably just make out that says 1981. So these engines are super old. So old that finding information out about it was actually really, really difficult.
Now, when I say difficult, what I really mean is bordering on impossible. The image you're seeing is literally the only sales image of the engine I could find. I checked Rotax's site for its history, and there's really no list of this engine at all in its karting form. Thankfully, the next thing I did was have a snoop around on Facebook. These guys at the British Historic Kart Club have been really great. I put up some questions and they were answering straight away, seemed to have a bit of knowledge around a lot of the old gear. So if you're into old karts or old engines, definitely hit these guys up.
Okay, so now that we've found out some information on this thing, let's mount it to the cart. One very handy thing is it seems to have a fabricated engine mount already that has indexing on the frame rails just like your regular kart engine mounts do. Let's pop it up there, have a look and see how she looks. Okay, first impressions. Hey, that's not too bad. Fits on the frame rails. Got room for the sprocket to line up with a sprocket holder on the rear axle. Should make broom noises, all good. Here comes the problem. That is the carburetor. Being a rotary valve engine means that's the stock position for the carburetor. That becomes a real problem when you try and consider where I'm supposed to sit. Let's grab an old seat here. No bueno. Clearly the carburetor's fouling massively on where the kart seat's going to be. So, at this stage, we can do two things. Number one, give up, drink beer, save the engine for a different project. Or number two, try and work out a way to do something about it. When I talked to the guys from British Vintage Karts, they mentioned that this engine would have originally been ran on the left-hand side of the kart, so over here. In which configuration, the carb's out the side, and it'd work fine. It would have an inboard sprocket and drive, and I think the brake was over on the opposite side. Modern racing karts don't have that option, because there's nowhere for me to mount the engine over here because it's not a twin engine chassis. So, a couple of interesting things. First thing, if we look on the left-hand side case, there appears to be two options for where the carburetor mounts. So we might be able to get out of this by taking the carburetor and mounting it in the alternate position. Why is there an alternate position? Well, it turns out this motor was built for motorcycles as well as karts in two different versions. So in the motorcycle setup, the carb would be back here, not on the side. So that could give us some help, and we might be able to still squeeze our seat in with the carburetor back here. That brings us to our next problem. Let's grab the exhaust. Here's the exhaust. Now, I am not a welder, but this has seen some action. I particularly like the way that they've welded a nail on there, probably to try and stop some cracking, add some strength. So this has been modified about 50,000 times. I don't know if this was used on a bike, but I can't work out how it would have gone on a cart. Anyway, let's bang him on there. Alright, so straight away, we run into problems. If I'm going to mount my carburetor here, it's not going to work really in any fashion with the exhaust coming out the rear of the cylinder. Thankfully, it appears we can take the cylinder and rotate the cylinder 180 degrees so the exhaust is coming out the front. In that way we may get away with it. We're going to have to make a custom exhaust or some modifications, but we could run the exhaust down the side of the engine like so. At this stage that looks like it may be a plan. Well, that's it for today's working on the cart. We're at a bit of a crossroads. We've got to decide, do we keep the engine, this vintage Rotax 124? It will require me to start tearing into the engine, seeing if we can turn the cylinder around and seeing if we can find an alternate mounting, or we can use the alternate mounting for the carby. Do we keep that, or do we keep that and stick it in the corner for use on another project, maybe a bike or something like that, and grab something newer, maybe a two-stroke motocross engine for this project? At the end of the day, this isn't going to be raced. It's for a bit of fun. Never driven a shifter kart or anything with gears, so it's for a bit of fun and getting out there with your mates. I'd really like to know what you think. Should we keep the old vintage engine or should we upgrade to something newer? If you want to see more on the kart as it comes together, as well as plenty of the other projects that we're going to get up to around here, please hit like, hit subscribe, and then you'll get notifications every time I put a video up. Thanks very much guys, and I hope you've enjoyed our first video.